Come, Peter, cried Lambert from the line. We are waiting for you. For madam's sake, pleaded Hans, be quick. She's motioning to you to join the skaters. There, the skater's almost on. Quick, man, here, fasten it. I could not possibly win. The race lies between you and Master Schummel. You are a noble fellow, Hans, said Peter, yielding at last. He sprang to his post just as the white handkerchief fell to the ground. The bugle sends forth its blast, loud and clear and ringing. Off go the boys. Mein Gott, cries a tough old fellow from Delft. They beat everything, these Amsterdam youngsters. See them indeed. They're winged Mercuries, every one of them. What mad errand are they on? Ah, I know. They're hunting Peter van Holt. He is some fleet-footed runaway from Olympus. Mercury and his troop of winged cousins are in full chase. They will catch him. Now Karl is the runaway. The pursuit grows furious. Ben is foremost. The chase turns into a cloud of mist. It is coming this way. Who is hunted now? Mercury himself. It is Peter van Holt. Fly, Peter. Hans is watching you. He is sending all his fleetness, all his strength into your feet. Your mother and sister are pale with eagerness. Hilda is trembling and dares not look up. Fly, Peter. The crowd has not gone deranged, it is only cheering. The pursuers are close upon you. Touch the white column, it beckons, it's reeling before you, Huzza! Huzza! Peter has won the silver skates. Peter van Holt! Shouted the crier, but who heard him? Peter van Holt! Shouted 100 voices, for he was a favorite boy of the place. Huzza! Huzza! Now the music was resolved to be heard. It struck up a lively air, then a tremendous march. The spectators, thinking something new was about to happen, deigned to listen and to look. The racers formed in a single file. Peter, being the tallest, stood first. Gretel, the smallest of all, took her place at the end. Hans, who had borrowed a strap from the cake boy, was near the head. 3 gaily twined arches were placed at intervals upon the river facing the Van Gleck pavilion. Skating slowly and in perfect time to the music, the boys and the girls moved forward, led on by Peter. It was beautiful to see the bright procession glide along like a living creature. It curved and doubled, and drew its graceful length in and out among the arches. Whichever way Peter the head went, the body was sure to follow. Sometimes it steered direct to the center arch. Then, as if seized with a new impulse, it turned away and curled itself about the first one. Then unwound slowly, and bending low with quick snake-like curvings, crossed the river, passing at length through the farthest arch. When the music was slow, the procession seemed to crawl like a thing afraid. It grew livelier, and the creature darted forward with the spring, gliding rapidly among the arches, in and out, curling and twisting, turning, never losing form, until at the shrill call of the bugle rising above the music, it suddenly resolved itself into boys and girls, standing in double semicircle before Madame Van Gleck's pavilion. Peter and Gretel stand in the center, in advance of the others. Madame Van Gleck rises majestically. Gretel trembles, but she feels that she must look at the beautiful lady. She cannot hear what is said. There's such a buzzing all around her. She's thinking that she ought to try and make a curtsy, such as her mother makes to the meester, when suddenly something so dazzling is placed in her hand that she gives a cry of joy. Then she ventures to look about her. Peter, too, has something in his hands. Oh, how splendid, she cries. Oh, how splendid is echoed as far as people can see. Meantime, the silver skates flash in the sunshine, throwing dashes of light upon those 2 happy faces. Mevrouw van Gende sends a little messenger with her bouquets, one for Hilda, one for Karl, and others for Peter and Gretel. At sight of the flowers, the queen of the skaters becomes uncontrollable. With a bright stare of gratitude, she gathers skates and bouquet in her apron, hugs them to her bosom, and darts off to search for her father and mother in the scattering crowd. Perhaps you were surprised to learn that Ralph and his Frau were at the skating race. You would have been more so had you been with them on the evening of that merry 20th of December. To see the Brinker cottage standing sulkily along on the frozen marsh, with its bulgy, rheumatic-looking walls and its slouched hat of a roof pulled over its eyes, one would never suspect that a lively scene was passing within. Without, nothing was left of the day but a low line of haze at the horizon. A few venturesome clouds had already taken fire, and others, with their edges burning, were lost in the gathering smoke. A stray gleam of sunshine slipping down from the willow stump crept stealthily under the cottage. It seemed to feel that the inmates would give it welcome if it could only get near them. The room under which it hid was as clean could be. The very cracks in the rafters were polished. Delicious odors filled the air. A huge peat fire upon the hearth sent flashes of harmless lightning at the somber walls. It played in turn upon the great leather Bible, upon Gretel's closet bed, the household things on their pegs, and the beautiful silver skates and the flowers upon the table. Dame Brinker's honest face shone and twinkled in the changing light. Gretel and Hans, with arms entwined, were leaning against the fireplace, laughing merrily, and Ralph Brinker was dancing. Can you believe it? Yes. Oh, not the kind that would just exactly wear you out, but I simply affirm that while they were chatting pleasantly together, Ralph suddenly sprang from his seat, snapped his fingers, and performed 2 or 3 flourishes very much like the climax of a Highland fling. Next he caught his Frau in his arms and fairly lifted her from the ground in his delight. "Huzzah!" he cried. I have it! It's Thomas Higgs. That's the name. It came upon me like a flash. Write it down, lad, write it down." Someone knocked at the door. "It's the meester," cried the delighted dame. How things come to pass. Mother and children came in merry collision as they rushed to open the door. It was not the doctor, after all, but 3 boys, Peter Van Hope, Lambert, and Ben. "Good evening, young gentlemen," said Dame Brinker, so happy and proud that she would scarcely have been surprised at a visit from the king himself. "Good evening, you Frau," said the trio, making magnificent bows. "Dear me," thought Dame Brinker as she bobbed up and down like a churn-dasher. "It's lucky I learned to curtsy at Heidelberg." Ralph was content to return the boys' salutations with a respectful nod. "Pray be seated, young masters," said the dame, as Gretel bashfully thrust a stool toward them. "There's a lack of chairs, as you see, but this one by the fire is at your service, and if you don't mind the hardness, the oak chest is as good a seat as the rest." "That's right, Hans. Pull it out." By the time the boys were seated, to the dame's satisfaction, Peter, acting as spokesman, had explained that they were going to attend a lecture at Amsterdam and had stopped on the way to return Hans's strap. "Oh, mynheer," cried Hans earnestly, "it is too much trouble. I am very sorry." "No trouble at all, Hans. I could have waited for you to come to your work tomorrow, but I wish to call. And Hans, talking of your work, my father is much pleased with it. A carver by trade could not have done it better. He would like to have the south arbor ornamented also, but I told him you were going to school again." "Aye," put in Ralph Brinker emphatically. "Hans must go to school at once, and Gretel as well, that is true." "I am glad to hear you say so," responded Peter, turning toward the father, "and very glad to know that you are a well man again." "Yes, young master, a well man, and able to work as steady as ever, thank God." Here Hans hastily wrote something on the edge of the time-worn almanac that hung by the chimney-place. That's right, lad. Set it down. Figs. Wigs. Alack. Alack, added Ralph with great dismay. It's gone again. All right, father, said Hans. The name's down now in black and white. Here, look at it, father. Mayhap the rest will come to you. If we had the place as well, it would be complete. Then, turning to Peter, he said in a low tone, I have an important errand in town, Mynheer, and if— Whist! Exclaimed the dame, lifting her hands. Not to Amsterdam tonight. You found your legs are aching under you. Nay, nay, it will be soon enough to go at early daylight. Daylight indeed, echoed Ralph. That would never do. Nay, Metje, he must go this hour. The Frau looked for an instant as if Ralph's recovery was becoming a rather doubtful benefit. Her word was no longer sole law in the house. Fortunately, the proverb, humble wife is husband's boss, had taken deep root in her mind. Even as the dame pondered, it bloomed. Very well, Ralph, she said smilingly. It is thy boy as well as mine. Ah, I have a troublesome house, young masters. Just then Peter drew a long strap from his pocket. Handing it to Hans, he said in an undertone, I need not thank you for lending me this, Hans Brinker. Such boys as you do not ask for thanks. But I must say you did me a great kindness, and I am proud to acknowledge it. I did not know, until fairly in the race, how anxious I was to win, he added, laughingly. Hans was glad to join in Peter's laugh. It covered his embarrassment and gave his face a chance to cool off a little. Honest, generous boys like Hans have a stupid way of blushing when you least expect it. It was nothing, Mynheer, said the dame, hastening to her son's relief. The lad's whole soul was in having you win the race. I know it was. This helped matters beautifully. Ah, Mynheer, Hans hurried to say, from the first start I felt stiff and strange on my feet. I was well out of it so long as I had no chance of winning. He looked rather distressed. We may hold different opinions there. That part of the business troubles me. It's too late to mend it now, but it would really be a kindness to me if— The rest of Peter's speech was uttered so confidently that I cannot record it. Enough to say, Hans soon started back in dismay, and Peter, looking very much ashamed, stammered out something to the effect that he would keep them since he won the race, but it was all wrong. Here Van Monen coughed, as if to remind Peter that the lecture hour was approaching fast. At the same moment, Ben laid something upon the table. Ah, Peter exclaimed, I forgot my other errand. Your sister ran off so quickly today that Madame Van Gleck had no opportunity to give her the case for her skates. Tst, said Dame Brinker, shaking her head reproachfully at Gretel. She was a very rude girl, I am sure. Secretly, she was thinking that very few women had such a fine little daughter. No, indeed, laughed Peter. She did exactly the right thing. She ran home with her richly won treasures. Who would not? Don't let us detain you, Hans, he continued, turning round as he spoke, but Hans, who was eagerly watching the father, seemed to have forgotten their presence. Meantime, Ralph, lost in thought, was repeating under his breath, Thomas Higgs. Thomas Higgs, eh? That's the name. Alack, if I could but tell the place as well. The skate case was elegantly made of crimson morocco, ornamented with silver. If a fairy had breathed upon its tiny key, or Jack Frost himself designed its delicate tracery, they could not have been more daintily beautiful. For the fleetest was written upon the cover in sparkling letters. It was lined with velvet, and in one corner was stamped the name and address of the maker. Gretel thanked Peter in her own simple way. Then, being quite delighted and confused, and not knowing what else to do, lifted the case, carefully examining it in every part. It's made by Mynheer Birmingham, she said after a while, still blushing and holding it before her eyes. Birmingham, replied Lambert von Monen. That's the name of a place in England. Let me see it. Ha ha! Ha! He laughed, holding the open case toward the firelight. No wonder you thought so. But it's a slight mistake. The case was made at Birmingham, but the maker's name is in small letters. They're so small, I can't read them. Let me try, said Peter, leaning over his shoulder. Why, man, it's perfectly distinct. It's T H. It's P. Well, exclaimed Lambert triumphantly, if you can read it so well, let's hear it. P H what? P H. T H. Oh, why, Thomas Higgs, to be sure, replied Peter, pleased to be able to decipher it at last. Then, feeling that they'd been behaving rather unceremoniously, he turned toward Hans. Peter turned pale. What was the matter with these people? Ralph and Hans had started up and were staring at him in glad amazement. Gretel looked wild. Dame Brinker, with an unlighted candle in her hand, was rushing about the room, crying, Hans! Hans! Where's your hat? Oh, the mister! Oh, the meester! Birmingham! Higgs! Exclaimed Hans. Did you say Higgs? We've found him. I must be off. You see, young masters, panted the dame, at the same time snatching Hans's hat from the bed. You see, we know him. He is our... No, he isn't. I mean, oh, Hans, you must go to Amsterdam this minute. Good night, mynheer, panted Hans, radiant with sudden joy. Good night, you will excuse me. I must go. Birmingham, Higgs, Higgs, Birmingham. And seizing his hat from his mother and his skates from Gretel, he rushed from the cottage. What could the boys think but that the entire Brinker family had suddenly gone crazy? They bade an embarrassed good evening and turned to go, but Ralph stopped them. Thomas Higgs, young masters, is a person. Ah, exclaimed Peter, quite sure that Ralph was most crazy of all. Yes? A person. Ahem. A friend. We thought him dead. I hope it's the same man. In England, did you say? Yes, Birmingham, answered Peter. It must be Birmingham in England. I know the man, said Ben, addressing Lambert. His factory is not 4 miles from our place. A queer fellow. Still as an oyster. Doesn't seem at all like an Englishman. I've often seen him. Solemn old chap. Magnificent eyes. He made a beautiful writing case once for me to give to Jenny on her birthday. Makes pocketbooks, telescope cases, and all kinds of leather work. As this was said in English, von Monen, of course, translated it for the benefit of all concerned, noticing meanwhile that neither Ralph nor his Frau looked very miserable, though Ralph was trembling and the dame's eyes were swimming with tears. You may believe the doctor heard every word of the story when later in the evening he came driving back with Hans. The 3 young gentlemen have been gone some time, Dame Brinker said, but like enough by hurrying it would be easy to find them coming out from the lecture, wherever that was. True, said Ralph, nodding his head. The Frau always hits upon the right thing. It would be well to see the young English gentleman, mynheer, before he forgets all about Thomas Higgs. It's a slippery name, you see. One can't hold it safe a minute. It comes upon me sudden and strong like a pile driver, and my boy writ it down. Amen, Herr. I haste to talk with the English lad. He's seen your son many a time. Only to think on it. Dame Brinker took up the thread of the discourse. You'll pick out the lad quick enough, mein Herr, because he is in company with Master Peter Van Horp, and his hair curls up all over his forehead like foreign folks. If you hear him speak, he talks kind of big and fast, only it's English, and that wouldn't be any hindrance to your honor. The doctor had already lifted his hat to go. With a beaming face, he muttered something about its being just like the young scamp to give himself a rascally English name. Called Hans, my son, thereby making that young gentleman happy as a lark, and left the cottage with a little, very little ceremony, considering what a great mister he was. The grumbling coachman comforted himself by speaking his mind as he drove back to Amsterdam. Since the doctor was safely stowed away in the coach and could not hear a word, it was a fine time to say terrible things of folks who hadn't no manner of feeling for nobody, and who were always wanting the horses a dozen times of a night. Higgs's factory was a mine of delight for the gossips of Birmingham. It was a small building, but quite large enough to hold a mystery. Who the proprietor was or where he came from, none could tell. He looked like a gentleman, that was certain, though everybody knew he had risen from an apprenticeship, and could handle his pen like a writing master. Years ago he had suddenly appeared in the place as a lad of 18, learned his trade faithfully, and risen to the confidence of his employer. Well, he had been taken in as a partner soon after his time was up, and finally, when old Willett died, had assumed the business on his own hands. This was all that was known of his affairs. It was a common remark among some of the good people that he never had a word to say to a Christian soul, while others declared that though he spoke beautifully when he chose to, there was something wrong in his accent. A tidy man, too, they called him, all but for having that scandalous green pond alongside of his factory, which wasn't deep enough for an eel, and was just a fever nest as sure as you live.